Page 144. In this week's parasha, we have Yaakov leaving Eretz Israel, leaving Beersheva, making his way to Haran for the purpose of building a family, expecting a wife, winding up with 4, right? That's what happens. Eventually he returns. The parasha ends with him returning to the land of Israel. So it's full circle. He leaves as an individual. He returns with a family. What's interesting to note is, number one, that at the end of the portion, he is actually building some kind of matzeva, some kind of monument. He's building a monument. So you don't have to turn, because you can trust me that it's in here on page 166, that he needs to build a monument as a sign of a pact between himself and his father-in-law, that the relationships will be good. So they build this monument. And the text tells us, Vayomer Yaakov, so Yaakov needs some help to build a monument, a lot of stones. So Yaakov turns to Echav. Literally, he turns to his brothers. And he asks them to please liktu avanim, gather stones. Vaikhu avanim. So, as you know, we've been informed, by Hakomas Matseva. You know the feeling of trying to look for stones, and there are always stones everywhere. But when you are looking for a small stone to add to Matzeva, it seems like they're all gone, and everyone's walking around looking for stones. So Vaikhu avanim, so his quote-unquote brothers gather these stones, and they make this mount. They eat there. That's part of making a pact on a monument. They name the monument in different languages, one for Lavan, one for Yaakov, and they make a declaration. Perhaps we'll revisit it, but who are his brothers? Who are his brothers? I read the text. Vayomer Yaakov le'echav. He's without brothers there.
Would be Lavan's sons?
Lavan's sons? I don't know, because if you would say that they are his colleagues that he had with them, you would give them a title of a brother, the band of brothers, or you would. But Lavan's sons, when he's having such a major issue, they just chased him. Remember, Lavan just chases him, right? They're out to get him. I don't think the title brothers would be given in this case, at least, where brother-in-laws are, wonderful, but I don't think that the title will be given in this case.
Maybe Yaakov's son.
Okay, so now we're working with Yaakov's sons. So that's the most logical explanation. But then you have to ask the next question. Why are they called brothers? Okay. So Rashi points out, based on the Medrash, obviously it's his children. But it's an odd upgrade that you give your kids when you start calling them brothers. Obviously you are elevating them. And obviously you are giving them a very significant role. It is as if Yaakov wants at this moment that he is not the one returning leading a family. This is a group that's leading a family. It is himself with his children. We are equals returning into the land of Israel. So don't view it as one household. View it perhaps as many. It elevates the significance of the return. He leaves alone. He returns with family, and again, they're not just his children, there are his brothers, they are equals. And this symbolizes the fact that the Jewish people, always, throughout our history, we leave the land of Israel as one entity, we come back and we are suddenly far more significant. We are elevated, physically and spiritually. That is the history of what Galut does for us. Very fascinating. We never view it as an ideal, but nevertheless, the results of the experience make us greater. You take Avraham. Avraham is the first one that had that experience of leaving the land of Israel. What does he come back with? Right? Some emotional wounds. I no doubt they both needed some therapy after being in Egypt and dealing with Pharaoh. Fine, but they were able to afford it. That's the main thing, right? We work hard, right? That we could have enough money to give therapy for our children because they need to be comforted. They need to deal with the many years that parents weren't there because they were busy working hard, right? That's how the world works. So Avraham returns with wealth. Yaakov returns with a family. They're not his kids, they're already equals and tremendous wealth. Klal Yisrael, they leave, Yaakov, when he leaves with 70, they return with, to go down to Egypt, they return with, what? Well, they return after many, many, many years, according to the text of 400, or according to us, we're dealing with 210 years plus 40, with a very large nation and with the Torah. So it's something happens in exile. We learn things in exile. So obviously, it gives us a little bit of an idea that we must learn something, read something in this week's portion, that Yaakov is away from Israel. The Parsha comes full circle. He leaves in the beginning and he returns. Angels in the beginning, angels in the end. So the Parsha is telling us, understand very well that yes, indeed, it's full circle, but try to pick up and figure out what were the things he gained while he is away. And it cannot just be physical wealth. There must be more to it. So that's what we're going to start and try to figure out as we read this week's portion. Now, there's a fascinating rabbinic tradition, right? And the rabbinic tradition, reading it into the text, works as follows. That don't view Yaakov's journey as one that begins in Beersheba and ends in Haran, but rather begins in Beersheba, reaches Haran, realizes that he forgot something. There's something Jewish about that as well, most probably, and he makes a U-turn and he returns to a very significant location to meditate, to pray. He makes a return. And then, again, he makes his way to Haran. That's a rabbinic reading. Fine? A rabbinic reading that is telling us that there were as if two departures from Israel. One, which is, we would call an unsuccessful departure, and a second departure where he is carrying with him a dream, a revelation, a boost, a moral boost. The poor guy is with nothing, leaves his family out to a foreign land, but the second time he leaves, after he experiences a revelation, communication from God, plus after he marks a specific location, which we'll discuss soon, and that is a far more elevating departure. And what does it symbolize? Now let's just turn to the text a little bit. Vayetzei Yaakov Beersheva vayelech Harana. So if you take the basic reading, it is he's going towards Haran. If you take the rabbinic reading, what does it seem to indicate? He actually makes it to Haran, and then afterwards, in verse 11, which is verse 2 of the Parsha, Vayivga b'makom, he encounters the place, obviously a significant place, and the rabbis tell us that we are dealing here with Temple Mount. And Vayalen Sham, he spends the night there. Kiva Hashemesh, we've discussed in the past a very odd way of addressing sunset. He went to sleep because the sun set. So there's a rabbinic reading to it, fine. Vaikach me'avnei hamakom, the word even, the word stone, appears quite often in this week's portion, and it's a key word to understand the message of this week's portion. He places it around his head, and he rests, and he sleeps there. And then he has the dream, Vayachalom vehine sulam mutzav arza. What does he see in his dream? A ladder. It's Rosho Magia Hashamayma, with the top of it reaching to heaven. And angels are ascending and descending on it. The Midrashim share with us a whole list of insights as to what it refers to. right? Does it refer to kingdoms that rise and fall? Does it refer to angels who protect him? But now he needs a different type of angel, one that's going to protect him outside of Israel. So the ones that are departing from being with him are the Israeli ones, right? And then he needs the ones that are going to be dealing with him in Chutz La'aretz. Or perhaps you have to realize that he is situated right now on the Temple Mount, the most significant location, allegedly of the Jews, but clearly of the Muslims. I have to be careful here, right? If the BBC might quote me. So it is the place where there was a Bet HaMikdash once, twice, Jews throughout the ages, unless they were kicked out by others, like the Romans, like the Muslims, like the Christians, always have had a link to that location, the Temple Mount. So he's located there. What do we view as Jews the significance of the Temple Mount? So we view that there's traffic between the physical and the spiritual realm, but there's two-way traffic. There are things that go up through the Temple Mount, and there are things that come down on top of the Temple Mount. What goes up are our prayers. And it is an incredible thing that throughout the ages we always have had the awareness that our prayers must face Jerusalem. And there's an understanding that indeed it's the gate of heaven. So things go up. We communicate with God. It is so much part of our faith. We always direct it towards Jerusalem. I like noting that in European communities, they used to always daven to Mizrach. You daven, you pray to the east. Sounds logical? Yeah, that's tradition. Suddenly, in the year 1601, there is a great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Mordechai Yaffe. He was actually in Toronto, a descendant of his who carried the same name. So Rabbi Mordechai Yaffe wrote a work on Shulchan Aruch. It was called the Levush. The Levush, a scholar quoted dozens of times. And Rabbi Mordechai Yaffe notes that yes, we are to pray towards the east. However, I believe that the ideal way to do it is to tilt the direction a touch to the south as well. Why? Because geographically, if you are in Lita or in Poland or in Hungary, and you want to face the land of Israel, it is good to face the east, but it's not precise. And if you want to be precise with locating Eretz Israel, tilt it a touch to the south. You ever heard of that? Is it logical? May you agree. Why did no one know? Paul, why do you not agree? Because you don't like changes in shul.
No, if you're going to pray towards Yerushalayim, pray south. What the east got to do with it?
Well, Yerushalayim.
A little bit. I'm nowhere close.
Well, you have to remember, if we would have a map here, correct? Or if we would have a globe or a map, you would realize that yes, Jerusalem is to the east, but it's also to the south.
It's southeast.
It is southeast. So why not? Well, I agree with him.
More south than it is east.
Depends where. It depends where. In France, it will be more east, correct? In the Ukraine, it's going to be more south, right? Or in Hungary, of course. Okay, so
Just being argumentative.
yeah, I know. So now, my question is, why did no one think of it until 1600? Now he published it then, so okay, so maybe 1580.
Maybe they did, we just don't know about it.
Didn't have the maps.
So the way I study things is that if no one puts something in writing, right, for me it doesn't exist. In other words, it's very possible that someone thought of it, but he's insignificant. So why is it not found in writing? So it's something that bothered me. So then at one point I had the opportunity of finding a website that had old atlases. And I realized that a very significant atlas was published by someone, don't recall his name right now, Aurelius something, in 1570. And he is the first one that oriented things the way we know it, that don't view Europe just being to the west of Israel, but rather Europe is to the northwest. In other words, he's the first one. So obviously, Rabbi Yaffe was familiar with the latest, I don't know if he had a subscription to the National Geographic, I don't know, but he obviously came, he was a knowledgeable individual, visited a local library, saw the latest map, and decided to make the adjustments. This is just a piece of information that I thought was interesting. We always face Yerushalayim because traffic goes up. Now it comes down as well. What traffic?
Not always. I think there are some tshuvas that talk about where you are in the world and where you should daven, where you should face. For example, Jews in Asia,
Correct,
do
no
not
question.
face east.
We many of us are guilty. You're not, but many of us are guilty of being Eurocentric. In other words, especially those of us who are, study. In other words, if you look at what are we in general studying, if you look at the insights what we study, most of the Torah we study that from the 10th through the 20th century is European. Clearly, you are 100% right that the Jews in Baghdad knew very well that you don't daven to the... But I'm addressing specifically the European Jews, so in Kaifeng and in the Jews in Harbin and the Jews in Shanghai, like my grandparents, obviously, or Jews who visit Mongolia, right? So
Face west.
so they walk around asking for Ma'ariv instead of Mizrach. What was that?
Not Jews, just Jew.
The Jew. The Jew and Chabad is there as well. I mean, Chabad is Jews. There's Chabad there too. What traffic comes down from the Temple Mount? Information, Torah in essence, because we know that there was a time, there was a structure, there was a court, that when there were halachic issues and you needed guidance, you went to a chamber known as Lishkat HaGazit. You had members of a Sanhedrin there, they would vote on issues, and that would be the will of God. So it is as if there's information coming down as well. So we have one explanation at least for the angels, up and down, prayers going up, information coming down. Yaakov Avinu spends his night there, and he hears very inspiring words from God. I'll be with you, this land is yours, you're going to return. Now, the image of the ladder is the first thing that does appear. It is one image that we could actually imagine on our own. Angels, yes, you immediately put wings on the creatures of angels. We are not big believers that angels are physical. They have wings because they are described in the book of Isaiah as creatures with wings, but it becomes problematic when your imagination takes over the angel. Ladders, I give you a green light to all start imagining a ladder. What does a ladder symbolize? So you're going to tell me, well, it connects different heights. But I'm going to share with you something else, and it works as follows. If you have a satellite picture, you have today, you have yourself a GPS, correct? Or you could even have some kind of iPad or any tablet. And you could turn on a map, press an app for a map, and it will show you where you are. Like a little blue dot, that's where you are. At times, you could be walking around the house, right, and it will actually move with you. If, on the other hand, you are in an elevator, even of a skyscraper, even of the CN Tower, right, my feeling is, and I hope I'm right, that there will be absolutely no movement because satellite-wise, you are in the precise same location, and you did not move one bit, not to the east, not to the west, not south, and not north. On the other hand, you are moving upward. That's a ladder. That's what a ladder does. And Judaism, and perhaps the message of this week's portion more than anything else, works as follows. There are those who view the religious life as one of action. Action. In other words, as a religious person, as a person who wants to fulfill the will of God, I have to act. True, there are things we should do. There are things that we should do. But that's not the most significant part of the religious life. The most significant part in the religious life is many times to do the exact same thing as every other human being. perhaps 95% of the time, you are doing the exact same thing as everyone else is doing. And you would not detect, looking from the satellite, you would not detect any difference. The difference is why you are doing it and your kavanah, your intentions. Why are you doing it? In other words, you can have two people who go to the workplace, do the exact same thing, interact with society the same way, are careful with what they do at work, in the marketplace, at home. For one, it is a spiritual act, and for the other one, not. Why? One of them is thinking about the fact that by doing it, I am actually fulfilling the will of the Creator. That I am living a life of purpose. I'm doing it because God wants the world to be settled. When people, there's children, there's a next generation, there is a higher being that's being satisfied. We're settling the world. That's what He wants us to do. I appreciate this wonderful world that I exist in. It's in the Alts in Kop, as they say. It's in the head, correct? That's a spiritual life. So it is not always specific actions. It is what's happening, the way we meditate, the way we think about what we are doing really defines spirituality. And I call it the ladder effect, meaning you have a ladder, you're in the same place, but you're really climbing high even though, despite the fact that you could argue you are in the same place, but that's not what's happening. And that is what Yaakov is going to go through. When you read this week's portion, this is a very busy man. Yaakov, when we talk about Yitzchak, the image of Yitzchak is a person who is sitting in a room, he is meditating, he is probably praying, he's probably reviewing, Jewish philosophy, the Noahide laws, right? Communicating, living a very spiritual life. Yaakov, you tell me, in other words, taking care of sheep for 20 years, and from what I never watched a shepherd for 24 hours straight, but I could only imagine that it is a job that saps all your energy at the end of the day. And I don't think he had 2 weeks off at the end of December, and I don't think he got a summer break, and I don't know if there were conferences for shepherds that his employees sent him on. I don't think it came with all those benefits, and I don't think he even had sick days. But that was a spiritual, we consider him spiritual. To prove to you he is spiritual, earlier today, I davened Shemona Esrei, and I communicated with God, and I actually referred to God as Elokei Yaakov, the God of the fellow that was chasing, right, and then shearing, and then huddling and moving around sheep. Is that spirituality, you ask? The answer is, that is spirituality. That is spirituality. Some would tell you the following, that there is an ideal spirituality and there is a practical one. And what I am talking about is a practical one. In other words, could be in the ideal world, Yaakov should have been like Yitzchak, but at some point, he did something, he stole something from Esav. Esav is more physical, so he took over. These are explanations that are all true and all correct. But the main message is that being a spiritual being is being engaged in the world, acting with awareness of what we are about, what our responsibility is, with honesty. That's how we view Yaakov. So that's one message that we could take from his life out in the Galut that he returns with. Message number one. Number two, now, someone asked me, you asked me about a week ago, that it is so odd that Yaakov is viewed as this patriarch, righteous person, and yet when you read about his activities, one after the other on the surface are quite problematic. He got those blessings, right? On the surface, we'll be careful here. On the surface, it looks problematic. He gets his payment. This week's portion, eventually he gets paid for his service. So what does he do? So there's a long a section here that if on page 158, we won't have time to read through it in detail, but if you're interested in genetics, and why specific sheep have specific spots, and why sometimes you could have two parents that have darker hair, and they land up with a blonde child, like our second Aaron, right? Aaron's blonde. How does it happen exactly? So if you study genetics, and if there's a grandparent, right, that sometimes the genes will skip a generation. Well, Yaakov obviously is aware of it, because you know what he does. He separates spotted sheep. He takes only the white and clean ones. He tells Lavan that the offspring from the white ones, which have spots, are going to be mine. So Lavan, right, believing that, I don't know if he believed that it's impossible, or believed that the odds are that it's not going to happen, so therefore was very satisfied with the offer. But Yaakov works things out by having the sheep observe spotted images, which the text describes. So he manufactures a nice amount of spotted sheep. That's what the text tells us. Fine, so he is aware of how the genetics work, but at the same time we ask ourselves, couldn't there be a little bit of a smoother way for him to get his payment? And why is the text sharing with us all this information? So these are questions that we ask about the text. Now let me share with you what I think. In Judaism, you are supposed to be ethical and you're supposed to be spiritual. It is extremely important to remember that the letter of the law, the dry law, should define what is wrong and right, should define for you what and how to be spiritual, and you should learn to channel your emotion, after and based on the letter of the law. For example, you have a person who loves Pesach. I must once met such a no. You love Pesach, right? You love Pesach. You just experience with the family and with the unique foods and with the dishes that you don't see the whole year. There is one person that loves it now, and they feel very spiritual on Pesach. So they start preparing about 4 or 5 weeks beforehand. They start preparing for Pesach, and then suddenly they get informed that the courts in Jerusalem delayed the month. They decided to make a Adar Shani, an additional Adar. So now he says to himself, listen, I'm already all excited. I'm all psyched up about this Pesach. I don't care about what the courts say. I'm going to be on a Pesach mode, right, in 4 weeks from now. Forget about what the courts say. So obviously we understand that the way it works is that there is a legal system. The legal system should go ahead and determine for you where and when to channel your energy. Fine? And it is extremely dangerous when you let emotions, circulate without being mindful of the letter of the law. It's interesting to note, if you wasted any time over the past 24 hours and you followed the news. So in the United States, there's a great city known as St. Louis. St. Louis, and one of its suburbs, is a place called Ferguson, Missouri. In Ferguson, at some point during the summer, there was an African-American kid by the name of Michael Brown, all of us shall. And Michael Brown is, the way the media describes him, was a soft, nice kid, who a policeman just walked over to him and shot him. And therefore people were there was a lot of emotion there. And when some communities are emotional, it seems like that the way what they do with it is that they loot and damage property. So now, last night, the facts came out. What were the facts about this gentle child that Lo Aleinu was shot, which we all agree is a tremendous loss for the parents, and any human being that dies is something that we mourn. But there are facts there as well. The facts are that he wasn't exactly this little kid. He was 6'4", and a big thing. He just stole a few cigarillos or something, some kind of cigarettes. He was walking in the middle of the street. A policeman says to him, all this I got from the news. A policeman says to him, stop. He attacks a policeman, He attacks the policeman brutally, injures him, and the policeman needs to defend himself for his life because he was afraid that he's going to grab his gun. So what does he do? He shoots him. Okay. Now, the emotions are independent. In other words, the emotions towards what's taking place have nothing to do with the facts. Because if you work with facts, in other words, what would be logical is that now that we finally know the facts, that the policeman shot him to save his life as self-defense, it should have been, okay, it's sad, but let's move on. Nothing was done wrong. But emotions have nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with the letter of the law, and nothing to do with facts. That's when it becomes destructive. Okay, so we have to know, you channel emotions after you are aware of the letter of the law. It's interesting that there was the great Chazon Ish of Bnei Brak talks about it. Is, let's say you have someone who is not doing his job well, just simply in a significant position, not doing his job well. So what do is you release him. But then people come claiming to either to the organization, and they say, this is terrible. He has a family. You are so evil for releasing him. In other words, the emotions that exist are going to be channeled, ignoring that. Listen, there's a letter of the law, based on logic and based on the halachic system. This is a person that did not belong here. Sure, there are a lot of emotions, and you should help the person, but don't determine wrong and right based on what you feel. Wrong and right has to be dealt with a system, a legal system, a halachic system, and the facts that the system addresses. That's what Judaism tells us. And therefore, with Yaakov Avinu, if we're going to go ahead and analyze what he did, was it permissible? It's the only question we have to ask. Was it permissible? And the answer will be yes. In both cases, it was permissible. The blessings Yaakov and his mother felt, it would not be appropriate that a person with an evil agenda should walk around with blessings and feel the responsibility of leadership. Leadership in the hands of those who are not responsible could be quite problematic for a whole region. Look at the Middle East, right? There are those who are in the position of leadership who have a responsibility to go ahead and do what is good for their people. And you tell me if Mahmoud Abbas is making statements that are helpful for his people. Forget about the Israelis now. Is what he is doing good for his people? Obviously not. Obviously not. And therefore, they felt Esav being in a position of power, destructive for him, destructive for the world. We have no choice. In this week's portion, he worked extremely hard and needed to be paid, and he makes a deal. He works out things that are all within, legally, are 100% fine. So therefore, what we are being told again is the fact that, yes, emotionally we have difficulty reading what he did. Emotionally it doesn't make sense, but approach it with a dry legal system. This is what we are being told in this week's Parsha as well. And it's something that we bring back with us, to the land of Israel. Just as Torah was given in the wilderness when they are away from the land, so too these teachings and these values are something that they pick up when they are there. So that's another thing that I believe they picked up. And then we're going to focus on one more, and that we're going to read inside. So if you could turn to page 146. Yaakov is encouraged by the vision, and in verse 1 on chapter 29, he makes his way to the east. And the Torah describes in detail what he sees in the field. He sees there flocks of sheep that are waiting. They are waiting by a well that has a very large stone on it. And the Torah in verse 3 gives us a detailed description of how exactly they would provide the water to the animals. And in verse 3 we are told when all the flocks would assemble there, they would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep. Then they would put back the stone over the mouth of the well in its place. So here we have a detailed description of how a well, right, a well, somewhere in Turkey, Armenia, functioned 3,500 years ago, and the text believes that it is significant for us to be aware of it. And then we are told that later on, when Yaakov sees Rachel coming, he is the one to remove the stone on his own. The stone here is referred to 4 times. 4 times. In the previous section, when he commits himself to one day build a temple, or his descendants will build a temple, and they will use the stone that he slept on, Evan appears there as well. At the end of this week's portion, the word Evan makes its appearance again, because they make that monument, right, which is like some kind of pact that he has with the family of Lavan. What is the significance of the stone? So obviously, the first stone refers to a temple. There are values of the temple, and that's what's being referred to here. And in Judaism, it's important to remember, the Jewish outlook of our temple has never been as a home that belongs specifically to us. My house is a house of prayer for all the nations. We are big believers that the Jewish message is not just a message for us, it's a message for humanity. We never ever have viewed other nations and other cultures as infidels. Not the Jewish way of doing things. How do we view it? We view it as we have a mission. We are the educators of humanity. We have the responsibility of teaching them wrong from right. The revelation that occurred was not just for our sake, but was for the sake of humanity. Correct? What is the message that we want to go ahead and provide them? So we want to teach them as follows. Humanity as a whole did not succeed in fulfilling its mission. When we read about the story of creation, and you read the Parsha Bereshit and Noach, and you read about the failures of different generations, like the generation of the flood, or the generation of the Tower of Babel, you read about a generation that does not achieve its mission, does not recognize that as humans you have a responsibility of living the world, settling in the world, but recognizing that you need a creator to go ahead and achieve it. It's interesting that I was telling Miriam and the kids, I said about Dr. Benjamin Carson. Ring a bell, Dr. Benjamin Carson? Okay. Yeah, a little bit? Okay. Dr. Benjamin Carson, so number 1, he's a doctor. Number 2, he was a young man who grew up in Detroit, Michigan, African American, right? Where there are many challenges that exist in those communities to succeed. And his mother, who only got up till 3rd grade level of education, was determined that her children shall succeed. So she forced her children to read books and write reports, which in those communities was a tremendous chiddush, that you're not just sitting and watching TV and hanging out outside in Detroit of the 1950s and 60s. So she pushed her kids. This child, Benjamin, he mentions, as he speaks publicly now throughout the United States, that his nickname in school was Dummy. And he calls himself that he was the safety net for the class, because everyone knew that even if they get a low grade, Benjamin is going to be getting a lower grade. So he gave them this feeling of safety to his class. Pushed by his mother, he succeeds in school. Now, he notes that he had a terrible temper. Right? The father wasn't part of their life. He had a terrible temper. He once even tried to stab someone. He ran after his mother with a hammer. Very problematic. At one point, he realizes that his temper has complete control over him. So he locks himself up in a room for 3 hours, and he read the Bible. And in the Bible, in the book of, I think it was Mishlei that he read, Proverbs, he read about how destructive anger is. After those 3 hours, he notes, he never again had an issue, and he prayed. I forgot to mention that. He prayed to God. He studied the Bible, prayed to God that God should free him of this anger that controls his life. After that, he never, ever again suffered from anger. Eventually, he became a neurosurgeon. He was the first one in 1987 to separate the Siamese twins who shared sections of the brain. Extremely well respected. It's worthwhile to go ahead and read about the story of Ben Carson. It's important because it shows you the ability of what a human could achieve. But for me, right, as a Jew, the message is that humanity has to recognize, and again, this is not a Jewish concept, that we have to do our part. But the biggest problem is when humanity believes they can achieve everything on their own, that you don't need assistance from above. Here is a person who prays. In other words, he has a difficulty, he has a challenge, he senses that this challenge is going to overtake his life. So what does he do? He studies our text. He prays to a God that is based on the God of Israel, and obviously God tunes in. Prayer does not belong to the Jewish people. And his life changes. That is a Jewish story. That is a very Jewish story. No question about it. And that's the way we view when we go ahead and talk about the well of Torah. We talk about the teachings of Torah. A well, just as water takes care of physical needs, the water of Torah takes care of spiritual needs. It belongs to humanity. Humanity did not recognize it, but the Jews are the ones, the Jews on their own have that mission. So if you reread this text here, what we were told is that there was a well. In general, you needed many flocks to go ahead and remove the stone to provide the water to the flock. They didn't do it, but one person on his own was able to do it. Who was the person who was able to do it on his own? Yaakov. Yaakov, symbolizing the people of Israel, he is the one that gives the water. This is what the Jews, and the impact the Jewish people are having is not just in Eretz Yisrael, but even throughout the many years of Galut, we are having an impact based on Jewish values, based on our connection to the temple. So the message here, and it's the first thing that he encounters, and it is the first thing that the Torah describes, is to give us this idea that Galut is not just the time that we walk away with things we gain, but we make a contribution to the world as well. That when we come with our values and live by our values, we have an impact on the world based on our values. That's how we read this portion. I hope there was something we could take from this class. I do thank you for coming, and everyone have a wonderful day.